Welcome. Nice to see some familiar faces, some new faces. So, first thing that I'll invite you to do is interlace your fingers if you are able to do so. If you're not, then imagine that you're interlacing your fingers. So just do that. Some of you have done this experiment before, so you think you know already, but maybe you do, maybe you don't. It's always new, actually. In case you don't know what I mean by interlace the fingers, I mean, if you have two hands, then you take your fingers and you just do like that. And just notice what that experience is. So you might have thoughts about it, but actually the thoughts only serve as a distraction, right? They're just the thought says, oh, I already know this, or I can't do this, or whatever else it has to say. This is boring, this is stupid, or, ooh, this is exciting, what is this? But all of those are just distractions from the just direct simplicity of the experience. Now, can you feel that in the fingers? Probably. Can you feel that in the wrists? So notice, is there a difference between the two wrists? There is, for a whole lot of reasons. One of those reasons is that if you notice when you interlace the fingers, you might even look down and notice one of your thumbs is on top. So they're not even. Creates a slight difference in the orientation of the wrists. One is turned slightly in one direction, the other has to accommodate that. So just feel that. Just feel the difference. And when you really start to feel it, all of a sudden it's kind of weird, isn't it? Maybe you start to, something's not quite right. Oh, how do I get that right? Oh, I don't know. I don't like this so much anymore. What about in the forearms? Can you feel the forearms? The elbows? So really feel in there and notice that there's so much that you habitually overlook. You wouldn't even have noticed all of this if all we'd done was just, if I just said interlace your fingers, okay, let's do the next thing, you wouldn't have noticed any of this. And if you're thinking about it, you're not noticing it. The noticing is automatic, but if your attention is on the thinking, then you don't notice the noticing. Now, can you feel that all the way up into the shoulders? You can, but allow yourself. Now, you can also notice this in the whole torso, spine, right? You can start to feel, are you slightly twisted? Are you sure that you're facing forward? Does it feel even? Does it feel relaxed? Maybe you start to notice it in your breathing even. Now, if you're capable and confident in your ability to do so, and if not, then don't. But if you're capable and comfortable, then keep the hands interlaced and then place them upward so that the palms are upward facing. Just notice what that experience is. And don't stress yourself. Just whatever you can do with confidence and comfort. Still breathing. It's not like there's no test here. It's just your own experience. And then lower that down. So now take your hands apart. Notice how the two hands feel when they're apart. Do they feel different from one another? Okay, now let's interlace them again, but do it the opposite way. If you're not sure which way that is, then just do it the usual way without thinking about it and then switch it. So when I mean opposite, I mean, you notice that one of the thumbs is on top the way you did it before. Switch it so the other thumb is on top, which means the rest of the fingers also switch, so they all shift. So they just shift over one. Now, how does that feel? And because you went through this whole exercise of being aware before, you can also notice much more about this experience than you would have otherwise. So just notice, you know that this must be different. You know that it must be the complement to the other experience. But how much are you allowing yourself to really allow that complementary experience? How much of the other experience are you still holding on to? So just notice. You can feel it in the fingers. Are the fingers able to fully surrender into this experience? So just allow the fingers to surrender into this experience. And allow the wrists to surrender into this experience. And don't be afraid to be foolish or to make a mistake or to tremble. Maybe you find it's just awkward. You don't know how to do it. There's a trembling, there's a hesitation, there's a fear there. Just be willing to allow that. Be willing to allow it to fall apart, because it has to fall apart before it can be something really new. Otherwise, we're just holding on to the old and calling it something new. Feel that in the forearms. Let the forearms surrender to this experience. And let the shoulders surrender to this experience. Let the breathing surrender to this experience so that you can actually inhabit this posture, which it has to be different. unless you're holding on to the old. If you're holding on to the old and just pretending like it's new, then it won't really be different. But if you're really surrendering, then it's new and it's actually radically different. So the breathing also can be surrendered, so that the breathing now is moving in this space, which means you have to surrender the ribs, the whole torso. And then if you're confident and capable of doing so, then let's explore. We're going to do similar to what we did before. We're going to invert the hands and bring them up and just notice what that is. Maybe that reveals how much you were still holding in the fingers of that old position. So can you really surrender the fingers and the forearms and the wrists? Maybe you notice trembling, uncertainty. You can bring them down and let the hands come apart. Okay, so let's close the eyes if that's comfortable for you. If it's not, then you don't need to. But the reason that that I'm inviting you to close the eyes here is just to tune in to that direct experience without the additional stimulus of the visual field. So we're just dampening that down by closing the eyes. So now you should be really much more aware of yourself in a new way than you were 15 minutes ago when we first started. And you can be aware of how much unnecessary effort you make to maintain some kind of pattern. So there's a habit there, a habit of just how you hold yourself, just this basic underlying sense of how you know that you are you and how you're here and how you're doing it right, how you're succeeding or not succeeding. And it's this whole complex. It's how you hold the shoulders, the hands, the tongue. So let's go through a little exercise. And what we'll do is I'll just name the parts of some parts of the body. And as I name that part, all you need to do is just direct your attention to that part of your body in your awareness. And just be aware if you are making any unnecessary effort or strain there that you are able to let go of. And don't aim for perfection. It's not about all or nothing. It's just about through awareness to see if you can allow that to soften a little bit. And I'll be going somewhat rapidly. So don't aim for perfection. Just follow along and just trust in the process. It doesn't need to be anything complex or difficult. Okay. Left eye, right eye, left nostril, right nostril, tongue, back of the throat, back of the head, inside the left ear, inside the right ear, the right shoulder, the right shoulder blade, the right elbow, the right wrist, the left shoulder, the left shoulder blade, the left elbow, the left wrist. Now just notice the relaxation and heaviness that you're aware of. Don't try to force anything. So it's okay if it's not 100%. It's okay if it's just a little bit. It's okay if there's some distraction or discomfort. Just notice whatever heaviness and relaxation you can. And here's what I'd like you to notice is I'd like you to start to notice how you can allow that same relaxation and heaviness to continue as you start to become aware of your breath. So normally when we become aware of the breath, we, out of habit, we start to breathe in a bigger way. But here I'd like you to just allow the breath to be relaxed. And in order for the breath to be relaxed, you're going to allow the rest of the body to be as heavy and relaxed as is reasonable for you to do. So this is not about how relaxed you can be. It's not about achieving some kind of perfect breath. It's not about any of that. It's just an awareness exercise, and it's about being aware of your habits, allowing those habits to become conscious. So you're just now aware of the hopefully somewhat unusual relaxation and heaviness in the body, particularly in the torso. And then you're aware of the breath, and you're allowing the breath to move and occupy that relaxed and heavy space so that you're not lifting, pushing, heaving, squeezing. You're just relaxing and allowing the breath to be also relaxed. So as you're aware of the breath, now you can start to be aware of the other ways in which you have been holding this unnecessary tension and strain. And here, as before, don't be afraid to make a mistake. Don't be afraid to tremble. Don't be afraid to experience some uncertainty. Don't be afraid for whatever happens. So you can be aware through this of so many subtleties of yourself, and they'll be familiar to you on the one hand, and on the other hand, it's like you're seeing them clearly for the first time. So they're things that you've always kind of known about, but now you see them clearly, like how much strain you are putting yourself under so much of the time, and how unnecessary that is, and how many fearful, anxious thoughts you have, and how many completely unnecessary pressures you place upon yourself to be perfect, to get it right, to figure it out, to achieve, to somehow accomplish or succeed. And if you're really aware, really just allowing yourself to come to rest and observe in this clear way, you will start to notice that there's some other possibility. In this moment, at least, there's this possibility where you've set aside this time, you've chosen to be here, and so you can just make this choice to completely surrender to this mystery that is here. Really is a mystery. So if we are constantly straining and we say that we want peace, or we could substitute another word there, we want fulfillment, we want satisfaction, we want contentment, we want okayness, then in this moment of simplicity and clarity, perhaps it becomes clear how we cannot have both what it is that we say we want, which is the peace. I'll just use that word, and you can substitute whatever word you would like in place of that. But we can't have peace and hold on to this strain at the same time. If we're holding on to the strain, what we're doing is we're proclaiming no. We're proclaiming no, this is not peace. Peace is only available once I've strained adequately, once I've fretted and worried and tried and efforted and schemed and protected. Only then is it available. That's what we're signaling. So we can't have both. So it's up to you what you're going to do. You know, this is a moment of telling the truth. You have available to you in this moment this possibility of at least just a moment of complete surrender. And even if the mind says, I don't know how to do that, you know, because it's actually abundantly obvious exactly exactly what is necessary, which is to just completely abandon ship. Just leave that whole uh, pattern. Just let it go. Just for this moment. You don't need to fix it. You don't need to solve it. You don't need to understand it. You can just completely surrender just for a moment. And just in case that's not, in case you still have doubts about that, just gently scan for where in your felt sense you're still holding on. Perhaps it's in the head, still clinging to this kind of hyper vigilance. I got to see it. I've got to understand it. I've got to be on guard. I've got to watch for it. I've got to know. And just be willing for this moment to surrender that, just to release that, just like you're desperately holding on to the edge of a cliff. And finally, you just make this choice to stop holding on, just let go like that. Maybe you notice it in the heart, and there too, same thing. Just notice that it requires effort and strain, and just be willing to surrender that for a moment. Or maybe it's in the gut, and there too, you can just be willing to surrender, just to let go without knowing how, without knowing what the consequence will be, without having the certainty in thought of what that means or whether it's good or bad. You can just take that risk for a moment just to find out. And if you're really willing to do so, then what you'll find out, or what you are finding out, is that you are still here. Even when the clinging is not. So when there's no strain, no clinging, no effort, no trying, no grasping, you can notice that you remain. And this you that remains is not a thought. You can try to think about it, but the thinking about it doesn't ever really touch it. So you can just notice that in this instant, just this one instant in which you let go, surrender everything, you are still here. So what does this tell you about who you are? Now, hopefully it's clear that this which remains is that which is constant. So this is what is always here, whether there's grasping or no grasping, thinking or no thinking, regardless of what feelings are occurring, regardless of the circumstances, regardless of how much money you have in your bank account, regardless of what people think about you, regardless of what you think of yourself, regardless of whatever sensations may be occurring or not occurring. This is the constant. This is the thread. So this is our essential recognition. Now, if you try to skip over this, then you're shortchanging yourself. But on the other hand, another possibility, and I see this happen, is that you can have this glimpse, and then this glimpse becomes the new religion, new philosophy, new thing to think about. And then it's dead and it does you no good. So we have two options you can choose. One option is that you can just remain here, eyes closed, as this stillness, silence, and completely disengage from everything forever and ever. So you can recognize, as you can easily do if you just take a look now, if you're really surrendering, then it becomes very clear that the whole world appearance is within you. It's a thought arising within you. And that nothing that you have ever experienced or ever could experience is outside of that. And it's really not substantially or really at all different than a dream, in which case you can just choose to completely disengage. However, let's be really honest about it. You're not going to do that. So that's not the path for you. So then what's the second option? The second option is to anchor yourself here, to recognize the habits of identifying as all of these temporary ideas and notions. And to recognize right now that this, which remains when all else disappears, is what you are. And then to also recognize that the so-called objective reality is nothing more than a dream generated through habits. And to the degree that those habits are not producing pleasing outcomes and are distracting, then take a look and see what is the remedy for that. So observe right now in your experience, where are the sensations occurring in direct experience? They're occurring here and now in this space. They're not outside. They're not bound by time. They're not there's no cause and effect. They're arising now, period. And we can look in the same way at all the rest of it, the thoughts, the memories, the images, and all of it. So all of these things are functions only of the habit of imagination. So right now, if your eyes are closed, then your whole, it should be clear that your whole idea of yourself is only that. It's just an idea of yourself. It's a fiction. It's an imagination. But out of habit, if I ask you to imagine yourself, go ahead and imagine yourself. Notice you imagine yourself in a very familiar way. So it's like you interlace your fingers in the same way, and you say, that's the way to do it. That's the right way. And how do you know it's right? Because it's familiar. So who are you? Imagine yourself, and you imagine the story of yourself, what you look like, the quality of your health, how your body feels, how old you are, the kinds of thoughts that you have, the ways, the things that you're good at, the things you're not good at, the things that you're proud of, the things that you're ashamed of, the ways that you relate to other people, on and on, all of these things. You imagine yourself, and you have to ask yourself, why imagine that? How much of that are you pleased with? So it's just a groove that you fall into out of habit. You imagine yourself that way, you imagine your life that way, and then because you only experience what you imagine, there's nothing else. Then you're going to experience what you're in the habit of imagining. So what we need is two-part. First of all, we need to cultivate the skill of returning to 0 point, which is the first step that we've explored. So we can just learn how to more and more easily and rapidly surrender all of the unnecessary strain, all of the extra baggage that we don't need to be carrying around. And we can just return to that which is constant, that which is beyond effort, beyond all trying, all imagination, that which is the substratum. So that's step one. And as I said, if you're committed to just remaining here and abandoning completely the manifest world, then do so. But since you're not, and there's no shame in that, by the way, it's not bad, but let's at least then cultivate step two, which is the skill of the correct use of imagination, so that we're no longer at the mercy of the whims and habits of the imagination, but rather the imagination is something that we can command. So we can do this in a lot of ways, but the way we're going to do here today is we're going to do it's a Qigong visualization. So I want you to, with eyes closed, just become aware of the breath again. And I want you to allow for the breath to be as relaxed yet complete as possible, so that you allow the breath to be full without strain. That means you have to let go. You have to, when you encounter any kind of restriction, you either have to stop or you have to let go. So either the breath stops there or you have to let go to allow the breath to continue. So you'll notice that the breath consists of an inhalation, and then there's a space between the inhalation and the exhalation. And then there's the exhalation. And then there's the space between the exhalation and the inhalation. So just start to notice those parts of the breath. And now we'll start to use some creative visualization. So I'm using the term visualization, but you don't have to be good at actually seeing clearly in your mind's eye, but just imagine utilizing whatever inner sensory functions you have to the best of your ability. I want you to imagine as you're breathing in, so on the inhalation, that a gentle, pure white light is entering through the nostrils, traveling down into the belly, and then it's going to travel up the spine, through the spine, up into the head, and it's going to circulate around in the head. And as it's moving through the body in this way, it's picking up any darkness, any obstruction, any impurities, and mixing. And then as you exhale, I want you to imagine all of the impurities traveling out on the out breath. So we're going to do that for several rounds, and I'll walk you through it again. So as you inhale, you imagine this pure white light entering through the nostrils down into the belly, and then it's going to travel up the spine into the head. It's going to circulate around in the head, and then as you exhale, it travels out through the nostrils. So as this pure light white is traveling through the body in this path, you imagine that it is cleansing, picking up any impurities, any kind of darkness or obstruction, and then all of that travels out on the out breath. Now, if you are comfortable with that, then the next step is that you can modify it slightly so that on the inhalation, the pure light white goes in through the nostrils, down into the lower abdomen. And then once you've inhaled completely, you can gently and in a relaxed way, only if you can do so confidently without strain, hold the breath for a few seconds as you imagine the breath traveling up the spine, circulating in the head, and then exhaling through the nose and imagining all of those obstructions and impurities traveling out on the out breath. Only if that's comfortable. So this should be non-strenuous, relaxed, pleasant. Don't strain, don't push. And it's really, at first, it may seem challenging. And this is because we're not usually accustomed to commanding our imagination. Instead, we just are imagining ourselves to be the victims of our habitual imagination. So it's like any skill. At first, you don't have proficiency, and that can be uncomfortable, but just relax, play along, and let it be at your own pace. Don't push anything. This is not about getting to the head of the class and being an ace student. It's about being with your own experience and learning about yourself, learning about where the limitations are, where you strain too much, where you're out of sync, where you get lost and distracted, where you fall victim to the beliefs that you can't, or that it's too hard, that there's something wrong with you, or any of these other kinds of things that can occur, and just persist in it. Gently persist. And just let it be synchronized, meaning at first you'll find that the breath and the imagination are not synchronized. They seems like you can't get them to go together, but just relax and trust and keep guiding it so that the imagination and the breath synchronize. And we'll do this for a few more breaths and see if you can stay with this imagined process in a relaxed way for 3 or 4 breaths continuously. So now we'll, in just a moment, we'll wrap up the formal portion of this exploration today. So keep the eyes closed just for a moment and be aware of yourself. So be aware of yourself. Notice that there is this still and silent self that is the thread of all experience. It's what remains when everything else disappears. Notice that this silent self has no spatial boundaries, no boundaries in time. It's eternal and boundless. And then you can also notice this dynamic aspect of yourself, the sense of yourself that is alive. You might have a sense of yourself as energy or vibration. And this dynamic aspect of yourself is ever changing. So we could say that the silent and the dynamic aspects of self are both constant, but the nature of the dynamic aspect of self is that it is dynamic, ever changing. So just be aware for a moment of this expansive sense of self that is pure potential, in which the world is your oyster. You are free. You're free to be. You're free to surrender, free to release, free to relax, free to allow, free to accept. And you're also free to persist in your creative expression. So you're not bound by whatever has been. Whatever creative expression has come before doesn't bind you. You're free to start afresh now and to have this blank slate in which you can envision and imagine whatever is pleasing to you. So you know that the habit is, there's a latent habit that's always just lurking beneath the surface, so to speak. And as soon as you imagine that you might open your eyes in just a moment, you could allow that latent tendency to instantly flash into being, that tendency of how you understand yourself, identify, think of yourself, conceive of yourself, perceive yourself in your world, all the limitations, all the obstacles, all the defeats, all the badness, wrongness, shame, guilt, resentment, and so forth. Also, however, this potential to remain with this expansive more life affirming, more open, and more truthful sense of self exists for you. So make that choice. And then see what the experience is as you slowly begin to open the eyes, including this visual field in your world. So in just a moment, I'll conclude the recording of this formal portion, which will get posted publicly to YouTube. And then for those who are here live, I'll switch it over and we'll record a second one that will be a live Q&A. I will, before doing that, I just want to point out that you have had this experience, and the experience is very profound because you have recognized, even if just for an instant, this eternal self. And it's so simple that the tendency is to dismiss it. But I want to make the point that it's quite rare for people to have this recognition. Because you're here today, so long as you followed along, you had the recognition. Whether you think you did or you didn't, you did. And it is a rare thing. So I encourage you not to dismiss it. I encourage you to really take it to heart, because it's an enormous gift. And then the second thing I want to say is that the second part that we explored, which is this, what I would call the correct use of imagination, is something that the mind that thinks it knows all of the correct answers, especially if it's thinks it knows all the correct non-dual answers, will easily and happily poo-poo and try to get rid of. However, just observe what's normally happening in your waking state. And if you really do so, you will see that what's normally happening in your waking state is the incorrect use of imagination, in which you are imagining that you are a victim of your imagination, meaning that you have you imagine all these things that you don't want. Even the things that you try to imagine that you do want are all actually just reactions to what it is that you don't want. And therefore, you're really just entrenching yourself in what you don't want. And it's all compulsive. So if you really take a look at what I've pointed out here, you'll see that it's the only sensible thing to do is either the two things I pointed out. Either you're going to move to Himalayas and move into a cave, but you're not going to do. And I'm glad you're not, because this world needs more people who are engaged and awake and engaged. So then the only other thing that's available to us is to stop trying to mix these paths. There's the path of renunciation, which would be the path of moving into the cave in the Himalayas, which is a valid thing people do. But since that's not for us, then we're fools to mix that path and think that that's our path when it's not our path. Our path is to be awake and engaged, which means that since we're in our waking state, engaged in this external world, so by appearance, a good portion of the time, then it's up to us to be awake and to tell the truth about what's happening. And instead of being victims of the wrong use of imagination, for us to recognize the correct order of things, which is that imagination is my imagination. It arises within me as consciousness. And therefore, I am not subject to the whims or habits of that imagination. And I am perfectly capable, and it's absolutely allowed for me to make creative use of that imagination so that this imaginary world can be a more pleasing place. But again, the mind will go crazy with that one. So I'll leave it at that. And for those who want to stay on for the Q&A, we'll do that. So there'll be an announcement from Zoom here, so be prepared for that.